Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. This episode is going to be a little bit different for a couple of reasons. I have been wanting to introduce a card, my Oracle cards, for quite some time, and I have chosen to do this with my guest today, Daniel, because he is very near and dear to my heart, and I will go into that in a little bit. But first, let me introduce Daniel. And then I will introduce the card that I pulled for today's session just to set the stage. So first, I have with me today Daniel Adams. And Daniel was incarcerated for 29 years for first-degree murder of his wife, Tracy. He served 30 years at the Virginia Department of Corrections after being sentenced to life. Since his release 3 years ago, he's become a certified recovery specialist, trainer of trainers. He started a documentary about domestic violence. He's been on the podcast Family Peace Initiative Organization. And of course, he's on my podcast today. He pays it forward by helping those with substance use disorder and mental health disorders. He has 3 years appointment with the Arlington County Community Service Board of Substance Use Disorder Committee, and he has an appointment with the Arlington Addiction Recovery Initiative, which is just the beginning for Daniel and what he is embarking on in his life. So Daniel, I cannot thank you enough for coming on to share your story with our listeners. Your story is I don't even have words for how it is the perfect example of what it is that I'm trying to do here. So welcome.
Thank you, Susan. It's a great honor and to be here, to be able to do this because this is it's going to it transformed me prior to being invited to do such. And upon meeting you, and now my life switches and changes into another gear as we do this morning, and when we complete it, my life will change. But the process of this, it doesn't go to my head because it's something that I do out of the labor that I have that comes from my heart. Because I've been given a second opportunity to get a first opportunity right. So my latter years was definitely better than my former years. And most important is taking what I have done and being able to not only save lives, but to help those who are afraid to reach out, who are in the grips of a domestic violence relationship. And most important, those who do have substance use disorders and those mental health disorders, because people need to know that there's someone out there that's just like them, who's not in their situation is not unique, that gives them the attitude and fortitude to actually reach out and say, okay, there's somebody I can help. Oh, there's somebody that's inspired me, and I'm gonna find a way to find who this person is, because I love people. As a saying I always use, I went through hell to get to heaven, and I love people.
And I,
It does.
yeah, and I can feel that with you. And so I wanted to start today, as I said earlier, I have started to introduce my Oracle cards that I've used for years and years, but wanted to really start to pull them in as I get downloads for people that I am speaking to, which I really have never talked to my listeners about. So I'm trying to really start to introduce that. And so today, before you and I started talking, I pulled from the Wisdom Oracle cards, Time to Go. And the message here is that you are getting ready to embark on the next part of your life. And for those who don't know, you're 59 years old, correct?
Oh, no, 62.
Oh, you're 62. You were 59 when you got released.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, and after doing a 30-year prison sentence for murder, for you to be who you are now and the way that your life truly has transformed has been remarkable. And so when I was quiet and pulling a card for you today, and I pulled this one about time to go, that you had been thinking about retirement, and yet your life is getting ready to take off like a rocket. And that's what I get with you. So let's start now that we have a foundation. Let's start from the beginning. You've told your story. I've watched the interviews you've done, and I think that you have an incredibly powerful story to share. And that no, regardless of what we do in our life, we all have the power to change, to transform, and to really turn that darkness into light. So please feel free to start anywhere you would like in your story. And I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
I definitely would like to start with saying Tracy didn't deserve what I did to her. She deserved better. But being a person, my behavior is no excuse. I take complete and all responsibilities for what I did. I will always be sorry for what I've done, and not only that, it's something that is always on my mind every day. Because I am sorry is not a word that describes what I truly feel on the inside from what I've done. But what I'm doing from that is trying to give to others as much as I can of myself, and to help them to restore their lives, because I didn't think that my life would ever be restored until a friend said to me while I was in prison, and at the time I was smoking weed and snorting morphine pills every day. He says, promise me one thing, that I'm going to get my life together. He was dying of cancer, lung cancer, and he was 50, and his name was Tony Coleman. And when he asked me to promise him that, I made that commitment right then and there to do that. When I was incarcerated, he was the only man I ever cried with and shed tears with me, because I knew it was his end and it was my end. But he had given me a direction that I needed. So after 17 years of being incarcerated, I surrendered my drug addiction. And since then, have accumulated 16 years of uninterrupted sobriety by the grace of God and my understanding. But most important is being able, not knowing that I was going to be fighting to learn how to heal while I was incarcerated. Because after 12 years of being incarcerated, I really wanted to know why I did what I did, because I didn't understand it at all. And I reached out to some state senators and delegates and got one response with two names on it: the Turning Points Men's Program in Dumfries, Virginia, and the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. I wrote to Turning Points, and from that, I was sent a DV 2000 workbook, which is Domestic Violence 2000 workbook at the time, and this was January 2002, and that was when I first was introduced to the will of control, and how domestic violence operates in each person, and most important as a man. And that set me on sail. My coordinator, her name was Mrs. Beatrice Lee. She worked with me for 10 years. And I was on a mission at that point. I was on a mission because I really wanted to learn. She sent the video crew to interview me in 2005. And I still have the CD videotape from that interview that I was at State Farm Correctional Center when I did it. And I was scared to death because there was other women around. And it was like, they're going to hear what I've done, because the shame and the guilt in my life was so overwhelming. It controlled me. It controlled me where I was even afraid to tell other guys that I was incarcerated with of what I did, because I didn't believe that I had did it. I didn't want to accept it, but I knew I needed to find out why I did what I did. And so I worked with her, and I got honest with her until I read an article in 2013. It was one of the rare times I was at Buckingham at another correctional center. And I read this article, that a person named Christopher Fay had wrote. And he had run a domestic violence program called Homestretch, located in Falls Church. And it was about a young lady named Amanda. That was another turning point for me. When I read that article, I had to find out how can I get in touch with this man. So I called my sister in Boston, Phyllis, and she sent me back an address, and I wrote to him, and he wrote me back. And then he came to visit me in prison for 1 hour. And then he started writing me with questions for me to get gut level honest. And that was the hardest thing I could do, because some of the questions he asked just brought out so much pain.
I would like to hear some of the questions because I want listeners to know that you were sentenced to life and you got out. And I know that these are the steps that you took that put you on that trajectory to actually get released. Before we jump into the questions that were asked where you got really honest, which I'm feeling is where the healing or like where the shell started to really crack open, you were one of 12 children, correct?
I was the last of 12, yes.
You were the baby, and there was tremendous amount of trauma in your life. I'd like, because I'm sure listeners are wondering what led up to killing your wife, Tracy. So can we pause and just go back a little bit to kind of set that stage? Because you had already lived such a life of trauma before this tragedy happened with your wife. Can you give us a little bit about that pre-story so that our listeners understand?
I grew up the last of 12 in a house that never showed no love. Um, at 5, as much as I could remember, I was scared to death of my father, because my father, all he ever did was hit. That's all he ever did. And me being a kid is going to be a kid. But he didn't see it like that. He's and I was so scared of him, because all I have, the violent part of him is all I ever knew. Go out back, grab a switch. Here, come here. I'm gonna grab me by the seat of my pants slag and take his belt off and whoop me over. Or we get in the car as we get ready to travel to go out of town. I get in the car. It's early in the morning. I'm gonna make some noise, and first thing you know, I get punched in the face. And so by the age of 12, I couldn't. He had came home and my mother one night, and my sister had told that I started a fight with her, and that's when he proceeded to whoop me again, and that's when I tried to fight him back. And it was only a blessing. My brother Tim was that he was on leave from the army. He came in the house to save me because my mother couldn't stop him. And I could hear my mother tell him, Claude, you're going to kill that boy. Stop it, but he couldn't stop. And that then and there was a major turning point in my life. And it wasn't long after that he left. Him and my mother separated. They never divorced, but he separated. And I was so angry because I didn't know what to do with my emotions, because we never talked about it. So here it is. I'm going through elementary school. I'm getting suspended in school. But nobody's wondering, why is he getting suspended in school? And it was the same until I found, in between the age of 12 and 13, I found my first drink of vodka. It was a drink of vodka and a Marlboro cigarette. And from that point, I was off to the races to try in and everything that would make me feel other than myself, because I didn't know myself, because I didn't know how to explain to family members or anybody what I was feeling, because my relationship with my siblings was, we never told each other we loved each other. In between like 14 and 16, I was cussing my mother out, because my mother had always told me, I wish you was never born. I wish I never had you. You just like your father. And I never wanted to be compared to him. But these are the things that I heard growing up. So that in a sense, made our relationship estranged as well, because it was always, which I learned today, it was always through violent communication that we knew how to communicate. But I always wanted her love. I always wanted her to nurture me. I wanted her to take care of me. But that wasn't because she had 12 children. Then she's taking care of grandchildren and cousins alike that came through the house. But with me, my hurt turned to anger. Every day was a life of red, unless I was high. And that's what made me use drugs every day to keep me high. But yet I became a bully. I was a bully. And I realized that I was a bully because of what I was bullied. And I didn't know what to do with that. And so I dropped out of school in the 10th grade. I attempted to go to adult education. I couldn't succeed in that. I went to take the test for the Army, for the Navy. I couldn't pass the test. I went and took the test for the Army. I couldn't pass the test. One of the things that helped me along the road was Chef Bonham was a man from the neighborhood who was really the only black man I knew at the time. He graduated from the Culinary Institute of America, which is the best culinary school in America. He taught me and several other black kids how to cook. And that gave me a trade. I had previously took bricklaying up twice to see if I could get my father to hire me on his crew, because I wanted a relationship with him. My father never said a word to me his whole life. All I knew from him was just his beatings. He never once said it. Growing up, he watched wrestling on Saturdays or a football game on Sundays, and I would sit there, but he never talked to me. Never once could I tell you what it was that in anything that mattered, anything that he ever said to me, it didn't happen. And I was angry. Not only was I angry, I felt abandoned.
I'm full of shame. I'm sorry. I want to just interject with what I'm feeling right now. When we're told that we're not worthy and not lovable and all of these different things, what we take on is a sense of deep shame that are not worthy of love, of any kind of love. Because when I tap into your family, and please tell me if this resonates, it feels like a battleground. There were 12 of you. It feels like everybody was trying to survive within your household. Is that true? Because you haven't really talked about what was going on with your 11 other siblings, because obviously there is a huge stretch between the oldest and you. Can you give us some idea of what's happening with everybody else in this household?
What happens is once my oldest siblings graduated at 18, the law was you had to move out that house. My older sister, she, Claudia, she's 80. And by 18, she was, by 19, she was pregnant, but she wasn't living in that house. My oldest brother, Michael, who is 78, is 79 in November, he was gone. And until this day, him and I, it's been 50 years or so, him and I haven't even spoken to each other. My third oldest, my sister Carol, she was gone. My sister Barbara, she was gone. My brother Philip, he was gone. And the next was Tim. He had joined the military, and David was right behind him. And I remember with David, he had got into it with my father, and my father was chasing him back in the 70s with this thick glass Coke bottle, and he chased him out the house. But I knew one of the things, if my father would have caught David, he was going to kill him with that bottle, because that's just where my father was. He would have killed him. And I won't forget it, because David was the only brother that I had in my family at the time that really took any time out for me, that really nurtured me or been with me and helped me along my road. And even while I was incarcerated, he was the sole person, a brother that always reached out to me. or send me money and such. And I won't forget that. Was just something that was and impressed upon my young mind at the time was, why was my father acting that way? And as I said it this past Thursday to a group, because I did a 40 session domestic violence program through Emerge DV, and I said it to them that Thursday night, that my father wasn't a good example to my sisters and what a good man was. He provided for us. He put food in the refrigerator.
Well, I was going to ask about that. There were 12 of you, and so you did have food, you did eat.
Yeah, he did until he left. And when he left, that's when we struggled. We struggled to eat. You know, when he left, he barely provided my mother with anything. And so at a young age, that caused for me, criminal activity. You know, that really started me on the road to criminal activity.
And was this to steal to provide food for your family or for you to eat? Or did you start selling drugs? Tell me, explain to me what you mean when that started your criminal activity.
What it was is breaking into stores and houses just to provide some food to eat, to put some money, besides being 12 years old and having my first job. It was to provide some food, because at the time, government assistance, back then it was like powdered milk or government block cheese or whatever. It was that way because my mother never had a job. And I remember in the 10th grade, I was skipping school one day. We was down in Crystal City, and it was like, and I see my mother's car at a person's house, and she was down there as, you know, cleaning a white person's house. And I felt so embarrassed. I felt really embarrassed because this was a way that she had to make ends, you know, to try. The ends didn't even meet back then. She was just trying to fill in the gap. You know,
How
it
many
was
of you were still in the house when you were 12? How many siblings were still living under the same
for
roof? Four
for
of you, including you or plus you?
including in me. It was my sister Phyllis, Naomi, Patricia, and me.
Okay.
And then
And your mother gets a job cleaning houses.
yeah,
And you drop out of school at what year? 16, did you say?
well, the 10th grade, yeah. I was
10th
like,
grade? Okay. So continue, please.
and so that was just, it was such a thing that just it was embarrassing to me. And growing up around that age, between 12 and pretty much from that point forth, I always found a way to put money in my pocket. I never did sell drugs. All I ever did was abuse drugs to mask the pain and the hurt that I didn't understand that was inside of me. And I will say, even till this date, I'm unraveling a lot of it. I'm much better with it, but it took me until I was 47 years old in prison when I got my GED in August 29th of 2007. And that was the biggest thing for me that I had accomplished. That meant a lot to me. And it motivated me as well. But growing up, I provided for a lot of things I did. And I always felt we never had enough, because at that time, one of my sisters who didn't provide for her children was living in the house with us. So my niece and nephew, they were living in the house. A cousin to it here would come and stay with us. And that was what that was. And then it was, my mother was always that person that did open up the door to everyone else in the house. But still, she didn't know how, which I really come to realize. Her and my father grew up in violent households, and all they did was pass that on to us.
Yeah, that was my question too. Was your father physical with your mother? You were not the only person your father was physical
No,
with.
no, I sure wasn't. He was that way with all of us. And that's one of the reasons why when I look at my relationships now with my older siblings, we I haven't talked to them, or if I don't call them, they don't call me. They basically have no relationship with me. And
Is it because of what happened and what got you to prison?
because they never processed or done any work on themselves in that space. They never, and now most of all of them in their 70s, they never they never done it. They have carried with them that pain, or they've been in other relationships that involve physical violence through their intimate partner relationship. But as far as them doing any work on themselves to get better, no. And so even if I participate in something that there are involved in, since my being a returned citizen now, I don't stay around them long. I get away from them because I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know how to be with them, because the word love comes from them, and it's not something that they mean, because their actions demonstrate in comparison to, as I tell my nieces and nephews and their kids, this is Uncle Daniel, or they call me Uncle D. And I express to them that the cycle ends with me, because I grew up not knowing my uncles, because my uncles never participated in my life whatsoever. And there's a difference with me participating in their life. I never grew up with them. I can name all my uncles, the ones that were alive, besides my Uncle Lawrence and Uncle Richard. They died throughout World War II. But as far as my other uncles, no. And that's why it's so important for them to know this, to know that they got a
Well,
uncle.
it's why your story is so special to me because, in my work, I've talked a lot about generational healing, that, we come into this life and there are generations and generations that have come before us, and we see these patterns come down the line of families and trauma that's been passed on, etc. At any time when we have any one of us can stop the pattern. We can stop the abuse. We can start to heal our family lineage.
I'd like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this ad. Hey guys, I want to take a minute to offer an opportunity for those of you who've been searching for a mental health therapist and haven't had any luck getting callbacks. I know it's challenging to find help, so I've partnered with BetterHelp. They are the world's largest therapy service, and they are 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you'd expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. More scheduling flexibility at a more affordable price. Get 10% off right now on your first month at betterhelp.com/rockyourshine. That's betterhelp.com/rockyourshine. Now back to our episode.
And I think that was what was so powerful about your story, that there are so many miracles in your story. The biggest one is that you were able to get out of a life sentence, which we're going to jump into in the second half of this interview. But bring us to this point. We don't need to get into the gory details, but bring us to this point when you met your wife, the tragedy happened, and then you go to prison. But can you make that transition for us, just where you were in your life when you met your wife and what was happening?
At the time when I met her, I was at a recovery center, and she came there for a meeting. And
You were at a recovery center for substance use?
yes,
Okay, that's an important part of the story. So, okay, I didn't know that. So tell us, okay, so at this point you were using drugs, alcohol, whatnot, and what got you into recovery the first time?
well, the first time was in '86. I was working as a cook at a rehab in Huntington, Pennsylvania. I lived in Philly, and Huntington is just right outside of Philly. In my first treatment center, because at the time I started smoking crack, and I was gone. And they sent me to an affiliated treatment center. I didn't last. The same day I got out the treatment center, I went right back to smoking crack. I came home from Philly.
But wait, who got you into treatment when you was
The treatment center that I worked for, they
Oh,
had.
okay. So you were literally you were smoking crack at the substance use treatment center that you were working at. They realized you had a problem, and then did you go to the treatment center you were actually working at? Is that where you?
No, they sent me to an affiliated one.
Oh.
So one that they was affiliated with. It was a 28-day program. And at the time, I wasn't worried about treatment. I was worried about my relationship. Her name was Shelly. I was worried about my relationship with Shelly. We was living together, had been living together. We moved from Alexandria to Philly, and that's what it was. So the first day out, when they released me from the treatment center, I went right back to smoking crack.
And did you go back to your job?
No, I couldn't. I was done, because that I was in a different space from smoking crack, and eventually called my sister. It was the Christmas of '86. I called her crying on the phone for her to send me some money so I could come home. And I came home, and it wasn't long until I returned back to what I had been doing. It wasn't long. As soon as I got a job, my life got better, real fast, within months. And I went right back to smoking crack. At this time, I came home. I went to another treatment. I went through Alexandria Detox here. And I went through detox, and from detox, they sent me to a treatment center. And that was a 90-day program. It was a 90-day program. Right before I was about to leave, that's when we was having a meeting at the treatment center. And that's when Tracy came in, and I seen that she was there. And that's when I went to go have a conversation with her.
And Tracy was she also in recovery?
Yes, she was.
Okay. I didn't know if maybe she were. Okay.
Yes, she was recovering from alcohol. And that's when, upon meeting her there, it was within 2 days of me getting out of the recovery center that we got together. And we got together and we went out to go eat. And started a relationship. At that time, I immediately moved in with her in her apartment.
And how old are you at this point?
28. Our relationship lasted from that March and until we got married. No, excuse me, I was 27 at the time. And then our relationship lasted a year. Not even really a year. It was a year. We got married in '89, May of '89. We got married. But the worst part about it is, before we got married, I became violent with her.
And had you been violent in relationships prior to your relationship with Tracy?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
And that's the questioning that Christopher Fay took me to. He took me to that questioning because he wanted to know what were my previous relationships were, and how was I in those relationships, and did I ever commit any violent acts? And the answer was yes. And for me to have said yes was the hardest thing for me to do, was to face myself, to say that I had been violent in past relationships, because I did not know, first of all, how to have a relationship. And second of all, I didn't know how to not be violent in a relationship, because that's all I knew.
Yeah, that's all you knew. That was your role modeling was violence. So let me ask you, what made it so difficult for you to admit that there was violence before Tracy? I feel like I have a knowing what you might say, but I want to hear it from you.
Because I wanted to present myself to be something that I wasn't at the. I didn't want to present myself to be this ugly monster dude that had a history of violence.
And that you had warning signs before this catastrophe happened, that it was easier to think this came out of the blue and it was sort of this weird anomaly, that this part of you, that you had no inclination that you were violent before what happened to Tracy. Is that
Yeah,
accurate? Okay.
yes.
So you
Uh,
had violence, obviously nothing like what happened to Tracy. And did you start using again?
that I did. My addiction didn't stop, even though at the point I had stopped for, it still grew. But then again, I really realized I really didn't stop, because in my job, it required me to be there from some days from 6 in the morning to 12 midnight. And I would actually go to a health food store, and I won't forget it, because I used to always buy these pills that, even though they came out the health food store, they was called Excels, and it was like another form of speed. And so I would actually go buy those pills and drink big cups of coffee, and it was like speed to me.
Right. And so how about Tracy? Did she maintain her sobriety in the marriage?
Yes, she did.
Did she know that you were using?
Yes, she did. Because as soon as I used, that was my first night of staying out all night.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you two fought about that.
that we did. And that was the beginning of the end right there.
Yeah.
That was it was in April of 1990. I started, and I couldn't stop. By June, I had to leave, and I had to leave,
You mean leave the marriage?
leave the marriage, and leave we was living in the apartment. I had to leave the apartment as well too.
Did she ask you to leave? When you said you had to leave, were you evicted? Were you kicked out?
Oh
What?
no, she asked me to leave.
Okay, so she asked you to leave because the energy I get when you're talking about the pills and the caffeine is almost like, you know, like steroids, like your rage was on steroids, like it just exacerbated everything. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting.
Yeah,
So she kicks you out, and that just puts you into a tailspin, right?
yeah.
Okay.
I felt as though I would always say is she was of us. I made her into my higher power. I made her to another drug. I made her to another addiction, and I couldn't live my life without her. Is where I was. I was desperate. I was at the. I was so. She was like, I wanted her to cuddle me, and like I was like a child. Is where I was, and I didn't want to be. I felt as though I've been abandoned all my life, and I didn't want her to abandon me neither.
And so you took her life, and that when you took her life, were you, what's the word I want to say, out of your mind? Like, were you using? Were you,
Yes, I was.
because I get the feeling that you were kind of shell shocked after it happened, almost like an out of body experience. Does that resonate at all?
It did. It was. I didn't know what to. I was just like out there. I didn't know
Out
what.
of your mind, like literally out of your mind.
It happened to be that. I mean, I went to see her at 6 o'clock that morning, and all I know is I was just so full of rage. I was just so full of rage when I heard the autopsy, because I didn't even recall what I did or how I did it until I had read the autopsy in my transcripts, that it was 13 stabbings. It was one fatal blow, and that some of the neighbors had found her. And the other portion was when she wandered in the hospital was a friend's mother who had attended to her, a guy that I grew up with. His mother, who was working at the hospital, had attended to her. And I couldn't believe that I did it. I denied it. I couldn't believe it. I blamed it on everyone. I blamed it on me using drugs until I started to do the footwork.
But it took time for you to do that. First, I want to just take a moment because I feel so much emotion right now too, and I'm sure that our listeners do. And I feel as deeply for Tracy as I do for you of what you've had to carry your whole life. Because I used to tell this story as a therapist that we have deep compassion for the 5-year-old child who's beaten and the 10-year-old child who's beaten. And we even have compassion at 12 years old when the kid goes to juvie. And then that same kid ends up in the prison system and we lose our compassion because there is nobody in prison who got there all on their own, as you know, which is why this story is so important to me, because Tracy lost her life, but you lost yours too in a very different way, I understand. But from a very young age, I just, the words that come out of me is love was beaten out of you. And now you are this enraged adult that you kill the very person that you probably love most in the world, right? Like you had real love for Tracy. And now you end up in prison and you fight your way through prison, I am sure, before you had this awakening, right? Because now I always say that because I've done a lot of, for listeners who don't know, done a lot of volunteer work in the prisons. And I've always said they were it's my most favorite work because all of the masks have been ripped clean in prison, where I've never sat with such authentic human beings with such deep remorse. And I know that there's a whole bunch of people in prison too that haven't done the work and they are living their lives enraged. But you did have awakenings. You've had to do a lot of work to get where you are right now. So let's go back then. You're in prison. You've done 12 or 13 years, did you say, before you met with Chris? How many years were you?
I met Chris 23, after 23 years that I had been in, that's when I met Chris.
But you
And
started making changes prior to Chris,
yes,
correct?
with Mrs. Lee at Turning Points Men's Program, that's when I started to make the changes. That was after 12 years, and she stuck with me for 10. And then in the process, that's when I was passed to Christopher Fay at Homestretch.
What
And
happened though? Because I know in those first 12 years, those were hard years for you. You spent a
my
lot of
first,
time
my,
in
my first
solitary.
7 years, I,
Huh?
all I fought. I was so mad at I was so mad at everybody and myself. All I did was I fought. All I wanted to do was be in a hole, and being a hole, I could keep the cell dark. I didn't want the light to shine on me because
How come? You didn't feel like you deserved the light to shine on you.
no, I didn't.
What happened? What happened then when you met Miss Lee? Like, what was the moment? Were you in the hole? Like, when did you decide I don't want to be this anymore?
I was transferred from Augusta to Sussex 2 State Prison, and it was, and there you locked down basically almost 23 hours out of 24, and I just got to thinking, how can I get help for myself, because the Department of Corrections didn't offer any help for my crime. So that's what made me decide, let me just reach out to anybody, and I ended up just reaching out to some senators and delegates of the General Assembly, Virginia, the General Assembly, and that's when I got one response out of all the letters I sent out. I got that one response, and that's when it directed me to Turning Points, and that's when I wrote, and she wrote me back. And till this day, I still have the manual that she sent me. I still have it.
But yeah, I still am sitting here going, okay, from somebody who spends all this time in the hole, gets transferred, and now you write this letter. Did you hear something? Did you feel something? Was it despair? Where did it come
I
from?
feel something. I felt what I felt was that I just needed to find out why I did what I did. I needed to, because it wasn't where my family, if it wasn't for the drugs and the alcohol, you wouldn't have done what you done. No, I realized if it wasn't for learning how not to, not how to correctly process things growing up in that house, I wouldn't have never done what I done, because in our house, everything was always detached and violent. And that's what taught me not how to learn how to make better decisions. And that was the what I've learned. And I took their saying when they wanted to blame it on the drugs and the alcohol. It wasn't the drugs and the alcohol. It was the way that I learned how. The only way I learned how to deal with stuff was through violent interaction.
And a deep self-loathing.
Very. I hated. Always thought I was teased when I was coming up. Everybody used to say, "Oh, you's a monkey," and everybody used to say, "You ugly." Everybody treated me that way, and that's how I felt. I felt ugly. I felt unworthy. I felt like I didn't belong in this earth. And those were the feelings that I had growing up. And that's why it wasn't until, later in my youth that I even had my first relationship. And really, Shelly was my first relationship. And I was like 19 years old at that time, 19, 20, in between that, at that time when I actually had my first relationship. But I still didn't know how to properly act in that relationship. I mean, I had young ladies or girls that, yeah, they liked me, and they thought, oh, he's handsome or whatever. But I thought about me was the worst, because nobody ever validated anything good, growing up to me, except how I was teased. I was teased really bad, and I didn't process it correctly neither.
Let me ask you something. Have you truly forgiven yourself for what you did to Tracy?
Chaplain Martin, he was a friend's father who reached out to me. He was a retired Colonel Chaplain. He would always tell me, God's forgiven me, forgive yourself. And I would say, since I've been out, it's been better than what it previously was, because I really dragged myself so bad. I mean, it was, I dragged myself so bad. And I really feel like my family still haven't forgiven me. They haven't forgiven me. And no, I haven't really completely set myself is still in bondage to that, a state of unforgiveness.
Now I know what the card is about, so I'm going to show it to readers again. Sometimes I don't know that it's time to go. What I'm hearing is it's time to let go. It's time. This is what it means. Okay, now I understand our first conversation as well. I don't know what has happened in this 3 years, but it's the end of the clearing for you. It is the true letting go so that you can embark and align with that deeper purpose, that deeper shine. Everything that you've gone through to this point is so that you can help others reconcile with what they feel like is the unforgivable. This is just what I'm feeling right now, Daniel. It's coming in really strong. And that you are, because I told you I am deep belief that as human beings, we're the only ones that really have deep self-loathing, even though we don't necessarily know it. I think it's what, and it's what causes us to judge ourselves so harshly and judge everybody around us, that when we can truly reconcile with whatever mistakes we think that we've made that are unforgivable, the only one holding us back from that is ourselves. We are here to learn. Some of what we do, from we hurt each other all the time. We do it in small ways, we do it in big ways. But as long as we are living and breathing, that we are here, we are worthy of love. We are worthy of life. We are worthy of light. We are worthy of all of the beautiful and good things. But we're the only ones who can let it in to transform whatever horrific things we think we've done. And one of the reasons I wanted your story is to show that you weren't born a killer. You were born, and your life, what you were shown and what you experienced as a child, told you every day that you weren't lovable, that your life wasn't worth anything. And Tracy's death is not in vain, because you are here now. You've paid your dues. You've paid 30 years of your life. You have, trying to search for the word, it's your time to help others learn how to forgive themselves too, because the only thing that heals the world is when we embrace our own light and transform that darkness. And that's where you are. And that's what this means. That's what this card means, is that it's time to go. It's time to let go. So in our next 15 minutes that we have left, I want you to bring us back in this moment that you have decided, because you still have no idea that you're going to get out of prison. And so that's the other thing, right? You had a life sentence and you were let out for a reason. For a reason. And I'm hearing that in your freedom, you're going to also help other people set themselves free. So this man, Chris, remind us who Chris is again.
Chris is the director of Homestretch, which is a domestic violence program located in Falls Church. It's a whole.
And so Chris comes in because you want to understand yourself more.
Yes.
Okay, so Chris comes in and he goes down this line of questioning to help you get real and honest with yourself about your behavior that led to Tracy's death. Okay. Yeah. What happens after you meet? What happens in this meeting with Chris where a light bulb goes off? Go ahead.
What happens is I was willing to face his line of questioning, even though some days that it made me stop for a day or two before I went back at it. But I was willing to clean this garbage up out of me and to find out what was truly in me. And for him to ask me to explain to him the first violent action I had with Tracy, and for me to explain to him why did I go over to the house and kill her, and for me to explain to him why was I in a relationship with Shelly, and why did I feel as though I need to physically put my hands on her in order to control her, and for me to answer those questions was the biggest monumental, because nobody had really asked me those questions until Chris did.
What was your answer to those questions?
Oh, I think that's the hardest thing, that all I ever knew was how to be violent, and the way that I knew how I was controlled was the laying on the hands, and that was the same thing that I was repeating in the relationships with Shelly and then with Tracy.
And you're hurt. I want to just say this. I mean, I want to just say this out loud. your hurt and your pain was both internal and external, right? So externally, you hurt others, and internally, you were hurting yourself, right? You were doing drugs, you were smoking crack, you had all of the self negative talk. So this was that pain was leaking all over the place. So you have this conversation with Chris. And what happens next? Because you're only 12, 13 years into your prison sentence. What happens after that conversation?
You know, what happens after that conversation is we kept talking. And then he brought his wife in, and she introduced me to Brene Brown, which was the web of shame, because I've had so much. I couldn't get out of it. That was the added turning point. But for me to actually answer his questions and to answer them honestly was also a turning point. The other portion was I did take a program. It was called Writing to Heal. But I also took another program. It's called Houses of Healing. They had it, one session of it in the Virginia Department of Corrections, and they took it away. That was a big thing because I dove into that program head first. And I mean, when I said I dove into it, I just wanted to get everything off of me. I wanted to get it out of me. I wanted to just, I didn't want to feel that no more. I didn't want the pain no more, but it was still there, because not only was it still there in prison, I wanted the pain. I just wanted it to go away. I was still using, and while I was incarcerated, but I was getting better, even though I was still using, because I was looking at myself. I was looking at it and never, not knowing that I would ever spend the rest of my life in prison. I wasn't doing it for the parole board. I was doing this because I wanted to just, I didn't want to hurt as bad as I've been hurting.
So when you were introduced to Brene Brown and this idea of shame, that really struck something in you. She spoke to you.
She did. She did, because my web of shame was huge. It was huge. And she said something that I had never heard before, you know, and how to grow through this pain, and knowing that I'm not alone in this process. And that's what I needed to know, because in prison, a lot of times you're alone. And not only are you alone, lonely as well. I mean, being in a room full of people and nobody really understanding or don't even care to understand what you're going through. That's what had been experiencing. And I just wanted to know that somebody understood me, even though I didn't know at the time. They never met me. Just the fact that they understood me, because Chaplain Martin would always say that God's forgiven you, forgive yourself. It wasn't that hard. It wasn't that easy as said than done, because it was a lot of the pain that was holding me from understanding, a lot from me holding on to it, because I didn't know what to do with it. I really didn't know what to do. And there was some processes that, even though I was with Mrs. Lee, that was dealing with the healing process. The same with Chaplain Martin, and even with Chris as well, until he brought his wife in, Claire. When he brought his wife in, Claire, that was a change as well. Things started to get better, but the shame and the guilt was still there. It took me till I was almost about to go up for my last parole hearing before I was even able to tell a guy that I was locked up with what I had done. And even in the process of me saying it, I did it with my head holding down, because I couldn't get it out that this is what I did to get in prison. I wrote an article with the help of Chris, and Chris got it published through the Marshall Project, October 4th of 2019.
I read it. I read the article because I did a lot of research on you after I talked to you. And so I read that article. I was like, is this the same Daniel? I read it. It's a beautiful article.
It was, and it's a shame that it's still the only article that a man has ever written on that subject. But I wrote it because you said something earlier about Tracy's death not being in vain. I don't want it to be in vain. It's important because that work that I have been putting in since January of 2002 hasn't stopped, because this subject is a very huge subject. But most important is I'm not that violent person that I once was. I've done that work. Not only that, I don't prefer to use profanity in identifying with talking to people, but most important is getting honest and getting this stuff out of me. That was the time that I needed. And even when I made parole, it was a big surprise, because when I made parole, it took them a month and a half to even let me know. And they gave me 8 days to get up out the prison system at the height of COVID. But yet there was a mistake made in the paperwork, so they rectified it. But I wasn't in a rush because I was afraid to come back out here, because I didn't know how society would receive me, because I thought the best I would ever do was get a job working in a warehouse and not be seen by people, because that was where my self-esteem was coming out of prison. That's what I feel like, at best, this is what I deserve.
How did you get parole? How did you get parole?
How did I get parole? I had Professor David Brock from Washington Lee School of Law. I had Christopher Fay from Director of Homestretch, VA.org. My sister came in from Boston, Phyllis, and my sister Naomi, she came from Arlington. And I had Brother Willie, who was also a returned citizen, speak up on my behalf. I wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Parole Board, Mrs. Laura Hall, thanking her for everything that she did. And she was the first person to speak up for me at a parole hearing. And all the things, other work that I had been putting into trying to better myself, not knowing that I would ever make parole, because every time I did go off for parole, I was given a 3-year deferral. I never got mad at a 3-year deferral. I got better. I never got mad.
Sorry, what is a 3-year referral?
The 3-year deferral means they deny me.
Oh, deferral. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and that means they wouldn't see me for 3 more years. So I got better. I never got better. And that was a turning point in my life right there, because I just knew that there was something more to me than who I had been my whole life. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that there was something besides this person who's always been violent his whole life. And so that was a major turning point for myself. And most important, I knew that in order for me to keep growing, but when these people showed up, the Washington Lee School of Law, when they showed up, but I've never met Professor. I wrote to him, and that was it. And when he met my sisters that day, he said to them, he don't need our help. He got this one all in the bag. And that's what he told them that day, because I have been doing a lot of footwork the best that I could. I always grew up thinking that I was stupid. And I was looking at some of the other guys who was better talkers than me and such. I'm looking at it as they were smart, but I'm stupid, because I've been stupid all my life, but it was something that I was doing that they wasn't doing that has, I would say, recently made me feel like, no, I'm not stupid. I wasn't that dummy that everybody did. I wasn't that person that, even though I dropped out of school and I couldn't pass the test for the Navy or the Army, that I wasn't stupid. I was somebody that was smart, that was just hiding in a person that had the worst self-esteem and self-belief and representation and concept of himself, that was like, no, I just had those were the thoughts that I had that made me feel that way. But it was a lie that I believed about myself. And now I'm finding out that there's more to me that I didn't even know that existed. There's more to me that why I show the kids in my apartment building why they matter to me, or why I show my nieces and nephews why they matter, why I show the people that my members that I work with why they matter, because
Daniel,
I
why do
know.
you matter? Why do you matter?
Why do I matter? Because overall I'm a really good person. Overall I got a really good heart. Overall, you know, I was conditioned to really act out and do things that wasn't myself, you know. But also too, I've been given this opportunity to actually showcase who I truly am, what I truly am, and what motivates me and inspires me to say to a person that's homeless on the street, how you doing today? Can I help? Can I help you? Can I do something for you? Just to see them smile because somebody stopped and asked them those questions. Because even though a person might be walking down the street talking to themselves, doesn't mean they're not still human. They are still human. They just had an experience that just made them go that way. But it doesn't. But it's still important just to see another person smile.
And
That's
love is the only thing that can heal hurt. It's the only thing.
when I was a kid, I was connected to the group Earth, Wind, and Fire, the early Earth, Wind, and Fire, because they spoke to that part of me that wanted to be loved. That was the group that spoke to me, and that was my connection. That was my release.
What do you want to say to that little 12-year-old boy? What do you want to say to him?
I think I got to say that one for the second session. I would like to
Now,
say that.
say that now, right now. What do you want to say to him?
Daniel, you are a really good person, Daniel. No matter who's treating you bad, you are a really good dude. I need you to love yourself, Daniel, because it's going to show. You're going to show. When you love yourself, you're going to show. Appreciate yourself, Daniel, because nobody else will. You're a good dude, man. You're real good. People like you, Daniel. People love you. You know, love yourself. Don't worry about if your father doesn't love you. Don't worry about if your mother loves you. Don't worry about if your sisters and brothers don't love you. But you're going to love you. You're gonna rise through these, and you're gonna shine for you. You're not gonna shine for them. You're gonna shine for you.
That is so beautiful. We're going to finish this up. Two more questions. What does self-love mean to you now?
How to appreciate myself just the way I am, not the way somebody think I should be, but just the way I am, and to hug me, and to kiss me when I look in the mirror, to grab my heart and say, Daniel, you love you. Daniel Nesbitt Adams, you love you. Yes, you do, boy. You are the best. You know, just to be able to say I am the best. Not to say to somebody, oh, you the best. No, Daniel, you the best. You know, just to live my truth, to holler, to scream, and to live out loud, not to live like I need to keep ducking my head. No, To have my shoulders up, my back tight, my head up, and just to appreciate myself, and
Everybody give themselves a kiss. All right,
yeah,
finish this sentence. Hope is
helping others progress and elevate.
Daniel. You have elevated me in this amazing interview, and I will have you on this show again. I want to thank you for shining your light. I can feel it. You are a beautiful human being, and you are a beautiful soul, and you have so many. I'm going to cry. Ooh. You have so many people to help reconcile with themselves. And it's time to let go. It's time to let go of anything that is still holding you back. This is your time. And I am giving you a huge hug of gratitude for being here, for being alive, for shining your light, and for your self-forgiveness. And I just want to thank you. And I want to send you this huge kiss.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan.
And
Yes.
you and I will be talking again. I want to thank all of our listeners. And please, if you feel so compelled, please leave us a comment and let Daniel know how his story has moved you, whoever needs this message today of what it is that you need to let go so that you can shine your light more brightly. And I am sending you all my love, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for
Yes.
now.